We all know that World War II ended in 1945, but for one Japanese soldier, Hiroo Onoda, he would spend the next 30 years fighting in the Philippines. Was this all out of ignorance? Or was this his way of single-handedly resurrecting the Japanese Imperial Army? Find out this week on Everything That's Weird. Welcome to the podcast, Everything That's Weird. I am your host, Anthony, and I'm here with Brandon. And tonight, we are talking about, say his name. Is it Hiroo Onoda?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, there we go. And you might be like, I've never even heard of this guy before.
But I think Galaxy Quest did, because I think that's where they got their line from. Never give up, never surrender.
I love Galaxy Quest.
Mm-hmm.
Galaxy Quest is one of those movies that is a sleeper.
It's in my top favorite movies all time.
God damn, is that a great movie?
It's great. I say everything when I'm at work and somebody drags something against the wall or something when they're going, like, you'll be in a new house trying to go up through the stairs to get out the window, and you're like, you taking this big long stuff up the walls, and it's like somebody drags it across. You're like, you just Galaxy Quested the shit out of that wall. Because of that great scene where he's trying to leave the hangar. Yeah. It starts listing to the left.
Yeah.
Everybody's leaning.
Galaxy Quest is great. I love Galaxy Quest. That's such a good.
If you've never seen the movie, go see it.
Highly recommend it. So you may have heard of the most interesting man in the world, and this is probably the most stubborn man in the world.
Definitely.
Hiroo Onoda is famous or infamous? I don't know which one.
Mm-hmm. Well, both. Yeah, both.
Probably both. Both. So he was a Japanese soldier in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
He was trained as an Imperial Japanese Army intelligence officer.
Yep, that's important.
That is important because he's not okay. See, I don't know what that is in their army, but I guess it's not like a ranger. But you're pretty high up.
Well,
you're educated.
Mm-hmm.
You're educated. You're like, you have skills.
You're a strategist.
Right.
At least your commanding officers are, and in your unit intelligence, you would like disrupt their flow. Like you want to do things that screw up your enemy. Burn their food and attack their supplies and stuff like that.
He was like a tactical guy. That he was somebody that you would put in to disrupt the enemy.
Yep. And
he was trained at the Nakano school. No, so I don't know. Is that like? Is that like West Point?
It sounds like it, doesn't it?
It sure does. It sounds like it's a prestigious military school at the time. So anyway, he ends up getting sent to Lubang Island in the Philippines.
Yeah, they go there to take it over.
So, shameless plug. I did a documentary called The Bataan Project. It's on YouTube. You can watch it, guys. But it's about the Bataan Death March. And I didn't know a lot about this part of the war. And a lot of people in the United States don't know a lot about this part of the war. Mm-hmm. We actually surrendered the Philippines. So that I Shall Return is like a famous quote. And that comes from the surrender of the Philippines. So when that happened, the United States had to make a decision on the Pacific or Europe.
Right.
And this was sometime in like 43. So they decided on Europe because the Axis powers had a strong foothold in like some major cities. And at the time, they thought that the Japanese and what their timetable was and what they were going to do was not less important. It was just their focus needed to be in Europe, and then when they would secure that, they would go deal with the Pacific.
Right.
So my grandpa was in the Pacific, but he was in like Iwo Jima. But back to my documentary, it was about these guys that were serving in the Philippines, and before the war, they lived a very cushy life. Like, they were there to protect the Philippines, and so they had like butlers and like lawn keepers, and like they sort of lived like royalty. But then when it came down to it, and they were there to protect them, the United States pulled the plug on like their resources, and they had to surrender the Philippines. And when they did, they had to march to the capital. And in that march, you know, they don't have an exact number, but it's like 60,000 people died between there and like the internment camps that they kept them in.
Yeah.
And it's like a dark period in our history because it's like a surrender. We surrendered. And we don't ever talk about it. We never talk about the 10 Death March. It's not something you'll hear about. It's not like a glory days. And these guys that I interviewed and did this documentary about, they had like kind of been through that. And the Philippines during this time is a very dark time.
Yeah.
So like when we tell this story, you know, you have to keep that in mind. Because this actually kind of makes sense for why this would happen during that time. So he gets shipped there in 1944. And he was literally ordered, just as you said a couple minutes ago, to do whatever it took to disrupt the Allied forces.
Yes. And not die, not get captured.
Not die and not get captured. And he was under a direct order. Now, so they hold their order, their military orders are held in the highest regard because, like, literally, he was given a knife by his mom to kill himself.
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Big old bayonet.
Right?
Yeah. Big long one.
In case he was ever caught.
Yeah. That was her gift to him.
And it was his...
She said, you get caught, you stab yourself to death. This giant knife. Bleed out the jungle.
It's not funny. So, like, I can't imagine my
it's
mom
not funny.
saying
It's crazy.
It is crazy. But his orders were under no circumstances to surrender.
Yep. He wasn't to surrender, and he wasn't to kill himself. Which they did, you know. They weren't afraid. Obviously, they had the kamikaze bombers, but they would avoid capture by, you know, taking their own lives. So
but then when he gets there, he's like outranked by.
Well, because his commanding officer told him, "We will come back for you. We will return."
That is true. That is true. So, okay. So then, there's the end of the war.
Well, yeah, we made it real hot in Japan, and we told them they couldn't fight no more, and they said okay. And then we said you're not allowed to pick any more fights forever anymore, and they said okay.
Which
so, you know, Japan can't declare war,
right? And didn't recently they asked
It's in their constitution.
Yeah, but like recently, and that was to keep the emperor in place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like,
yeah, we imposed that on them.
So even like during the surrender, the emperor didn't sign the surrender.
And it's okay. I checked. We don't have, oddly enough, a Japanese listener, so we can talk smack.
I don't have anything against Japanese.
I know, but
yeah. But
that's the way it was. And then and so what happened was there was this. We actually went back in with Philippine forces and retook that island that he was on.
We did, and they returned, and that's what it.
Here's the thing that I saw when he got to the island. He was this a lieutenant intelligence officer, but when he got to the island, he joined a group of guys that
he was outranked.
He was outranked by a few of them, and he said that
they wouldn't let him do what he was there to do.
They wouldn't let him carry out because he was supposed to attack the airstrip, and he was supposed to demolish it. He was supposed to take out some bridges and all kinds of stuff, and they didn't let him do any of it. And because of that, because of that, that's why the island got taken back.
Right. That's all. And that's all, like, if you look at, like, Wikipedia, or you look at, like, any story, any, like, historical, they all say the same thing.
Yep. They said
he was held in check from what he was there to do.
Yep.
And because of that, that's what he says. Because of that.
That's what he says.
Right.
Yeah, all them other dudes are dead.
And they are.
He can say whatever he wants.
So,
but I mean, I think all the military strategists said the same thing. I mean, if truly his orders were to get rid of to attack the airstrip and all this, you know.
And they told, like, so these guys told me not a story about him at all. They were talking about the Bataan Death March, but it was very similar. So they had, like, the Japanese didn't expect us to surrender the Philippines, and they actually weren't prepared for the surrender. So they had, like, a bunch of low-level guys handling, like, giant groups of, you know, American military guys. Right. So, like, the only reason the American military guys didn't take over those, you know, low-level they didn't have any food, ammunition, they didn't have any supplies to do it. And that was what they said. They're like, man, we were left there with, like, nothing.
Yeah.
And so anyway, when this happens, this is sort of the end of my story when I'm talking about the Bataan Death March.
Right.
When he gets in there, so when he gets in there, it's kind of like when we come back. We kind of already have Europe under control, and then it's like time to focus on the Pacific.
Yeah.
And then we kind of, like, start to take over the Pacific.
Yeah.
And when that happens,
which is tough terrain to fight in. I mean, it's like, you know, if you go and look at, like, the Philippines, Indonesia, that whole area in there, and Southeast Asia, it's just a mess of tropic, like, you know, rainforest jungle islands that are mountainous. You know, like, it's really thick, rough terrain.
So my grandpa was in the Pacific, and he said, like, he was in Iwo Jima, he was in a bunch of different places. He literally said there was one battle where they fought and crawled all the way from, like, one coast of an island all the way to the other coast, turned around and fought all the way back. So, like, it's that kind of war.
Yeah, it's like all these little islands everywhere.
Sure.
It's just got clustered with them. And some of them got mountains on them. Some of them are flat. There's just so many.
So he gets prevented from like doing what he does, and they end up taking the island back.
Mm-hmm.
And this happens in like February of 1945. When that happens, he takes like a small band of soldiers, like some guerrillas, and they head to the hills.
Yeah, it was like the last guy. He ended up being like the highest ranking guy after they attacked. After America and the Philippines came in, it was only him and 3 other guys, and he outranked all 3 of those guys.
So there is a private, and I'm gonna.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I don't destroy his name.
So I was like, "You're gonna try these?"
Yeah, you.
If you're better off just doing the last names, because the last names are easy. It's private.
It's very similar to Chinese.
Yuchi Akatsu.
Or it's very similar to Hawaiian.
Yuchi Akatsu.
Soichi Shimada.
Yep.
Kinshichi Kuzuku. And Hiroo Onoda. All head to the hills.
Yes. Well done.
To maintain this battle.
Yeah, they get out there and they conduct guerrilla warfare from out there, staging small attacks on.
And it turns from like a traditional war to like more of a guerrilla warfare. What we're talking about.
Yeah.
So the first time they hear of the surrender is like a few months after. Well, it's October, so February is when they go up. At the end of February, so let's just say March. So like 7 months later,
yeah,
they get leaflets that say Japan surrendered.
Yeah, and they don't believe them.
No, they're like, this is a tactic.
They're like, nice try, motherfucker.
Yeah. Look, Wiley, go back to the drawing board.
They found the leaflet while they were killing a cow that they found.
Right. And we're going to get into that because they end up having a ton of fights with like farmers.
Yeah, like a lot of them. Yes.
But they think it's like Allied propaganda, so they didn't believe that this was a real thing. So finally, this goes on for a while.
Yeah, they even dropped leaflets. They tried a second round where they dropped leaflet, and this wasn't like, it sounds weird, like they were just looking for these guys. This was done in a few different places all through that area. Like I said, it's all these little small islands.
Right.
They had people stationed at different places, and these guys just hid out because like when they got overtaken, they just hid out. So they had to drop flyers to get them out, and it worked for a lot of them. But for these guys, they had those. That it was different because they got specific orders to. No, I don't. As far as I know, none of the other people got the order to not give up and never surrender and don't kill yourself and don't. You know what I mean? All these don'ts.
So finally, one guy is like, "Dude, this is dumb."
Yeah.
Yeah. He, Yuichi Akutsu.
Yeah.
He walks away in like 1949.
1949.
Right, 4 years later.
4 years in the woods, fighting and stealing. They had to steal food, ammo, all that stuff. They were stealing all that, everything they got. They was from doing like these little staged attacks on the community. Now, see, they were getting fired at. So, like they were saying, like, yeah, there was like this still war going on. They were like, everyone.
Which, to be fair,
yeah,
there's no cell phones.
Right, and if there's like if you got like a farmer, because some of these were the Philippine Commonwealth forces, so they wouldn't have been in full. Not necessarily all of them would have been in full regalia and look like your typical officer. So if a farmer was like, get off my land, started shooting at them, and they think it's, Allied forces, they'd start shooting back at them, and I think they just like assumed that they were still stationed there, and they were doing their best to disrupt them as much as they could, because they were setting crops on fire. They were burning rice and shit.
Which, it's in water. How hard is it to burn rice? It's got to be hard.
They were doing all kinds of shit. It was crazy. They were doing all kinds of just like devastating communities.
And so they even get like a surrender order printed by Yamashita,
delivered the same way, like leaflets out of a plane. They just drop them all through the thing,
and they're like Allied propaganda.
Yep, they was like signed by the General Yamashita, and they were still like, nope.
Nope, I don't believe it. So after he leaves in like 1950, the other three are like, okay.
Well, that put them on edge. They thought like he was going to give them up, like they're right here at this. So then they got really, really paranoid.
And then in 1952, 7 years later,
they
drop like family pictures, and they're like, "Hey, man, you know your nephew's born. Grandma had her 60th birthday." Like really trying to like tell him, "Hey, man, like it's over. It's okay, but it's like over."
Still not buying it.
Still didn't buy it. And then I guess it's like
for 7 years they were out there thinking, and they're still looting and bagging, and so Shimada gets shot in the leg, right?
By a group of people looking for them.
No, he got shot in the leg by a fisherman.
Oh, that's right.
Survived it.
And Onoda helped him back.
Yeah, it nursed him back to health. And like it took him a whole year to get him back to good. And then he got shot again by like you said, a party that was looking for him.
Oh
like, how does that happen?
It's terrible. It's not even funny. But
the only thing I could think of is like you're asking the guy what happened, and he was like, "Well, he was fucking shooting at me. He shot at me first."
It's crazy, right?
It's crazy.
Then 1972.
Yeah.
So we're talking, I have to do my math.
Yeah,
it was 27.
Now it's down to 2. It's down
to
2.
Right, down to 2.
And
so 27 years later, right?
Yeah.
Okay. He gets shot. The remaining guy, Kazuka, gets shot in a shootout
with the police.
Right.
In 1972.
Because they have all these guerrilla activities, and the police have made like several attempts to ask them to come down off the mountain.
Yeah, that's when they were burning the rice.
Right.
They got caught burning the rice, torching their rice, and that's when Kazuka got shot.
And then at that point,
he's 20 later. They're still conducting guerrilla warfare.
And then he's by himself.
Yep, he was all alone.
And then when he's by himself, there's a guy named Norio Suzuki, and he's
got a list.
This guy is incredible. Like this guy, he's the most interesting man on the earth. He's in search of Lieutenant Onoda, a panda, and the abominable snowman. In that order. He's trying to find those 3 things.
He's great. That's great. In that order.
I just can't imagine him talking to his friends at a bar.
Yeah.
They're like, come pie, and they do shots,
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you doing, man? And he's like, well, I'm going to the Philippines. And they're like, why? And he's like, well, I'm going to tell you why. Onoda, panda, abominable snowman.
That's great. Well, see, that's the thing too. It's like he was just like a legend,
Right.
you know. That's a legend they told back home in Japan. That wasn't like he's out there, dude. They were like, he might be out there. You know what I mean? It wasn't they like his list, even though, like, you know, because if I'm not mistaken, in that time, in that pandas were very, very endangered at that time. There was active breeding programs that bounced them back somewhat. You know what I mean?
Okay,
Because
I didn't know that, but okay.
I think I'd have to go and double check that, but I think around that 1974, I think around that era, pandas were in trouble. And
So wait, did he find the panda?
I don't know. I really wouldn't want to know if he found the panda.
Well, I know he didn't find the abominable snowman.
Yeah, we'd all hear about that.
He did take a picture with Onoda.
Yeah, well, he went and he found him.
Right.
Day 4.
Mm-hmm.
And so he like apparently he befriended him though. Like he made him comfortable. You know what I mean? And let him talk. And there's like this quote. Did you see the quote from Onoda like years later when he did an interview? He said this hippie boy Suzuki came to the island to listen to the feelings of a Japanese soldier.
But he takes a picture,
and
he's like, "What is it, man? What's keeping you on the mountain?"
Yeah,
and he finally tells him that he's looking for an official.
He's waiting for orders from his superior officer,
right? Like an official
who said he was going to come back and get him, and never did.
Right. And so he says, whatever happens, we'll come back for you.
Right.
And that guy's name is Taniguchi. And then he finally...
Suzuki goes back to Japan, finds him, and he's in a bookstore. His old commanding officer.
Mm-hmm.
He's running like a bookstore. He gets him and gets official papers from the government, Japanese government, and they take him to him and officially give him his terms of, and it's in accordance with the Imperial Command. The 14th Army has ceased all combat activity. And there's like 3 ordinance on it, but they all say stop fighting.
And that you relieved you of your duties.
Yeah. Relieve yourself to your command nearest superior officer if they can't be found.
And if there isn't one,
American or Philippine forces. Yeah.
Right. Surrender yourself to like the American or Philippine forces.
Yeah, correct. And then so he goes and gets his stuff and he goes to surrender himself. He's in his uniform the whole time. Like he still had that uniform on when he surrendered 30 years later.
So I've had a suit tailored for me.
Yeah.
And it fell apart in like 5 years. So
30 years in that fucking outfit, man.
Whoever's making the Japanese armies.
It was always only outfit.
Unbelievable.
I guess he was stealing clothes. He could have been stealing clothes, but that dude had on his uniform when he came out of them woods. I know that. Now, when he was properly relieved of duty upon his surrender, he turned over his sword. He still had his sword, his functioning Arisaka Type 99 rifle.
With like 500 rounds.
500 rounds of ammunition.
Right.
It says several hand grenades.
He could have went like 2 more decades.
As well as the dagger his mom gave him to kill himself.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's crazy. I mean,
so during this time, he killed like 30 Filipino villagers.
Yeah.
Right? During this time, like, and
they're not happy with him there on that island. They weren't big fans.
No, and he was
he got lauded as like a hero when he got back. He got like the hero's welcome when he got back to Japan. And
but in the Philippines,
was like,
he was like a pain in the ass. Right. In the Philippines, he was a pain in the ass.
You murdered like 30 people.
Right. Just farmers trying to grow rice.
Farmers, police. he was murder. They were murdering everybody.
But he ended up getting a full pardon from Marcos in the film, and that was kind of with like, that was like some.
Yeah, it was even. I guess they took it bad too, and he gets married, and his wife gives like a $10,000 scholarship, and that kind of caused shit too in the country in his name. So they were like, what?
Right.
In his name. Fuck
it's like
you.
It's like the Jeffrey Dahmer scholarship.
Yeah, right. For young black men.
Right. So he ends up writing a book. He becomes a farmer. He moves to Brazil. He has all this.
Yeah, well, I think it's
stuff.
important to note when he got back to Japan, he was not happy with the way Japan was being run. He was not happy with Tokyo. You know what I mean? He didn't like that whole. It was too fast and modern and no honor. Blah blah blah. I mean, he didn't like it. He got stir crazy immediately and pitched. He picked up shop and left. But I mean, if you go from what Japan was when 30 years ago from when he was there, you go backwards 30 years. Tokyo is huge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Tokyo, it is.
It's like the world's largest metropolitan area.
I believe that.
They got like their population is almost equal to like the entire state of California.
So I've always wanted to go to Tokyo. I've never been.
There's like 37 million people in Tokyo.
So there's a guy at our bar, Cam. We can use his first name, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's where he was stationed. He was a Marine. He was stationed there. He never saw any action or anything, but he's like, Tokyo is awesome.
Yeah, I bet. It's pretty wild.
He's like, so you have to be real respectful of why we're there. He's like, they did like a whole history lesson of why we're there. And he's like, you like, they have a whole bunch of customs that like we don't do. And, it's just different, what's acceptable there and what's not acceptable, And he's like, but for the most part, they're happy that we're there. He's like, I never felt like they hated us. He's like, but I was always really cool to everybody. And, it kind of made me want to go there. I've always wanted to go there, and I've always wanted to go to Hong Kong, but, like, Tokyo just seems like fun.
It does seem cool.
It seems like sushi and sake, right? Like go out and, like, nightlife, good times. But, like, yeah, he comes back and it's not what he envisioned. And there was some kind of like shooting, like a kid shot his parents, and that was kind of like national news at the time. And he started some kind of school that kind of like taught traditional values and things like that.
And he was teaching how to survive.
Right.
He was teaching young kids all his survival skills that he picked up living 30 years in the jungle with nothing, So he got lauded with awards throughout his life. I mean, and you're like, yeah, like, and you read what he did, you're like, yeah, he deserved that, he deserved this, he deserved that, but he never really apologized for killing 30 people.
No.
Or burning or stealing their food.
No. And he wrote a book and it's kind of like glossed over.
Yep. Never even mentioned all the 30 people that he murdered. So,
but upon his death, the prime minister, I don't want to destroy his name, Yoshihide Suga.
Yeah, that sounds right.
said, I still vividly remember that I was reassured at the end of the war when Mr. Onoda returned from Japan. And he's like, he praised his survival skill. And he was like, that is like the spirit of Japan, sort of. Like,
they even made him like, I think he even became like the kind of like what there would be like the mayor of the town he lived in Brazil.
Yes.
They made him like the head guy.
That is true.
Mm-hmm. And then he moved to Brazil. He heard that story about the kid, and that's what drove him back to Japan.
Right.
So he went back to Japan to start that school up, and then he would go back for like 3 weeks out of the year to Brazil. And him and his wife did a lot of stuff. She arranged scholarships. And
so when did they get married? Because I never did find that. Were they married before the war?
No,
because that's crazy.
No, in '76.
Okay.
It was like a couple years after he got back.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So.
Now I don't know if it was fantasized or romanticized, whatever you want to call it, but I saw something on him where he was living out in they were doing like it was like a movie on him. And I don't know if they took a lot of artistic merit there, but they showed a scene, and I don't know if this comes from some story they heard or not. I don't want to start a rumor, but in that they played it out like he met like one of the village girls, and he hurt his leg, and she helped him get better, and they ended up doing it. And then the next day he was walking out, and they were like yelling on the megaphones for him to come out of the woods. And he was running through the woods with his gun, and he was yelling, "You can come and get me." And then she comes up behind him, and when he falls on the ground, she comes up behind him and puts her hand on him. He turns around and he shoots her in the gut. She dies.
Oh shit!
So I don't know if that story's true.
Like fable, or
I don't know if that's fable or if they were just taking artistic, like, because the movie was definitely about him, but I don't know if that actually happened or if they just, if it was like that based on a true story. I love that. That's the best line ever. Based on a true story. Based on a true story. So Santa Claus, asshole. Come on, man. Based on a true story.
So the war's over.
Mm-hmm.
This guy refuses to stop fighting. He thinks every bit of information that he gets is propaganda, and he ends up carrying out World War II until 1974.
Mm-hmm.
All right, that's where we're at. We'll come back in just a minute. Okay, first off, he didn't stop fighting.
Yeah.
So this is my biggest problem with this story. As much as I'd like to believe that this is like the biggest case of miscommunication, like a Three's Company episode.
Sorry about that.
You're fine. He didn't stop fighting.
Right.
He knew he had several different times, several different ways.
Yeah.
Besides the villagers yelling up with the megaphone.
Yeah.
Saying, "Hey, dude, it's
stop shooting us.
Quit burning our rice.
Just come down and ask for the rice. We will give it to you if you stop shooting
all
us.
Good, dude. We have Nikes now.
Why are you setting it on fire?"
That, to me, it's two things. Like, I know American military indoctrination is a thing. Mm-hmm. Because my dad, like, old soldiers, you know, okay, they take, you know, my dad, like, people would always come to my house, like, your house is really clean. I'm like, well, yeah. Like, your mom must be a neat freak. Like, no, my dad was a Marine. Right? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I learned to sew because my dad learned to sew in boot camp so that you could sew your buttons back on your jacket.
Right.
You know, like, certain things like that. Like, I learned to fire a gun because, yeah, all that. So I know about military indoctrination. But it seems like Japanese indoctrination is a whole other thing.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it.
When your mom gives you a knife,
yeah,
on your way to war,
as a present.
As a present, right?
It's a present
to kill yourself with. Hey, Brandon, here's your suicide knife. You know what I mean? But like, and it's not to make fun. It's more of like cultural difference. That
well, sure,
shit.
Like what I was going to say is, Japan is no stranger to war at all.
They've been fighting. Like, they're like us. They've been fighting forever.
In
any great empire,
way longer than us. And greater magnitudes too. I mean, there's been civil wars there that lasted a whole century.
Right.
You know what I mean? Feudal Japan was, you know, strongest ruler wins. So it was like you built money through politics and power, and you bought armies and you warred, and that's just how it was for 600 years. Samurais, all that.
Well, so my dad was like, before he received his orders at Paris Island, they said, yeah, you're Westpac. And he's like, what the fuck is Westpac? And they're like, you're going to Vietnam. And he's like, oh, great. And they're like, no. and it is before Vietnam was like what it was. Mm-hmm. So it's like 65, but he's there from 65 to 67. And it's that time was like they had moved the main base from where it was to Chulai, which was like at the time like the main base. So they had to like fight their way across, you know, like the equivalent from like Kentucky to Michigan, right? It's like this like, you know, 400 or 500 stretch of land to get to where they're gonna set up shop for the war. And so that was so they met like the most resistance of my dad's, the 1st Marine Division in this time met like the most resistance for that time. And he was like, they were constantly grilled about like the history of the Vietnam War and like why we were there, what was happening, and you know, like it had started off as French. The French were there. That's why there's like a heavy French influence in Vietnam, and there's all this, you know, all this stuff. So like the Japanese it's very similar, you know, and a lot of people think that we pushed them into Pearl Harbor, but it was like just a matter of time. And that was kind of like...
They kind of got into an isolationist phase where they were all about themselves and they're closing off trade routes and saying, you can't go through our waters and we don't want to have nothing to do with you, and fuck off to everybody. And it was American forces that forced them to open up those trade routes. And I think I'm not huge on that, but it was something to that effect that kind of gave them the chip on the shoulder in the first place.
I love history. I love it. I think of course, it shapes like everything. You know, it's like I don't want to be a dummy and be like it shapes everything, but seriously, so Hawaii, there's a ton of Japanese people in Hawaii, right? Actually, all over Polynesia. So, and I don't even know if Hawaii is considered Polynesia. It should be because they're all Polynesian. But anyway, whatever. So I got obsessed with Hawaiian history when I went there because I'm like, this is the coolest place on earth. You know, what a trip. I can't even imagine what this place looked like in the 1800s, right? And you start studying like King Kamehameha, and he was the first one that, like, before then they were like independent nations, and they were all ruled by a king. They had kingdoms, and Kamehameha, he like made them one kingdom. So he like solidified the Hawaiian Islands, and they had like a navy, and they had like all this shit. And then it was taken over by like businessmen from the United States, and basically is because they had more power. It is. I know it's sad, but like they had more. But further to my point, if it wasn't us, it was going to be the Japanese, and it was a pivotal part of the Pacific because it was like if you fly,
not that. Spit in her face, but the Polynesians kind of worked like that too, you know.
They worked both sides of it.
Well, I mean, they would expand out and explore, and then just take over. And if somebody was there, they would kill them all and take the island.
So, like Kamehameha knew this was going down, right? He was actually really ahead of his time. He was really smart, and he kind of saw this happening.
Yeah. So
what he did was he secured like land. He kind of did what Roosevelt did with like national parks. So he started securing land around the islands. And there's like shit that you can't touch because of like King Kamehameha. And so one of them, there was a sheep herding family from New Zealand called the Robinsons. And he sold them Niihau, which is called the Forbidden Island, and part of Kauai, which is like, it's the most beautiful island in Hawaii. Like, Honolulu's there. You have, it's called the Garden Island. When you go there, it's sort of still undeveloped. I called because there was like a place for rent, and they're like, oh, you live in the island? I'm like, no, I live in Los Angeles. And they're like, yeah, it's $2,800. And I told a guy later that night, he's like, dude, that's an $800 a month apartment. So there's like a Howley price and an Islander price, right? Because they don't want you there. Right. Like, I literally saw a bumper sticker that said, welcome to Hawaii, now get home. So so when I started like doing research on Niihau, King Kamehameha sold them this island, and the Robinsons went there, and they own part of Kauai. Now, this real estate is in the billions of dollars, right? So the Robinsons were like super cool, and they're like, you know what? Traditional Hawaii. We're gonna do anybody lives here, traditional Hawaii, right? So no phones, no radios, no anything. So everybody that lived there was allowed to stay. Well, they had like 5 Japanese families, and this one Japanese family had a radio, and they knew World War II was like happening. Because Pearl Harbor had just been like bombed, and this before like the internment camps. So when this happened, when Pearl Harbor happens, a Japanese soldier crash landed on Niihau. He like got shot. He tried to stay up as long as he could. He found Niihau and landed. So they like throw him a party, right? And the only Japanese family is like, hey, you invaded the United States? And he's like, oh, yeah. And they're like, yeah, they're going to kill you. So it's called the Battle of Niihau. And he has this shootout. They only had 2 shotguns. And he had one. He had one. The other farmer had the other. And they had this crazy shootout. Nobody gets killed. But like 2 days later, after this 2-day battle, right? And the Marines come around and they're like basically cleaning house. They're basically picking up Japanese people and putting them into camps, which is a dark time in our history. But they're basically collected, and they're like, there's this Japanese soldier. So my point is to all that is that guy was willing to fight a whole island of people.
Yeah.
So this isn't crazy.
No joke.
This isn't crazy that this guy held out for,
well, that's what I'm saying.
Years.
Like when you get
29
into
years,
especially when you get into Southeast Asia, those areas, those people,
honor is a big thing.
It honors a huge thing, and none of them have quit in it. Yeah, it doesn't matter what, really any country that I've heard of in that area. Those people are tough. My dad told me a story from Vietnam where his platoon walked up on a Vietnamese soldier, right? They surprised him. He was taking a leak and his gun was against the tree. And they came out to the woods and surprised him. And he turned around, his pants were on the ground, and he's just standing there with his hands up. And my dad said he looked over at his gun leaning against that tree and all their guns cocked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so he stood back up, like, he started to look towards his gun like he was going to reach for it. And they all cocked their guns, right? So he real slowly leans down, picks up his pants and pulls his pants all the way back up and fastens them, right? Mm-hmm. And then takes a fighting stance.
Right. Like, I'll fight.
He's got all these guys and they're all pointing guns at him. And my dad said that was the bravest thing I'd ever seen. He took a fighting stance and one of his guys said, I'll fight him, LT. And he hands his gun to the other guy. And he said, my dad said this guy was like 5'5". You know what I mean?
You're right.
He was like 5 foot tall, maybe,
sure.
Whatever. He said, and this is big American dude. He could fist fight this guy. And the guy, my dad said he hit him everywhere but the bottom of his feet.
Yeah.
He said he went up. He said the whole time the American soldier, whoever he was going to shoot him. Just shoot. And they're pissing themselves. So
you're getting your ass kicked.
Yeah. Dude. So naturally, after after they see this go down, and they stop and they pull them apart. And my dad said that they treated that dude with utmost respect. He was treated fairly when they took him prisoner and stuff, and nobody fucked with him. They made sure he got fed and took care of him. You know what I mean? And
it's kind of like beat into our heads that we're the bravest. It's not true, man.
That dude stood up and was like, all right, let's do this. Let's roll.
My dad he had a very similar outlook on the Vietnamese people. He's like, those guys, you know what, man? They were fighting for it. Mm-hmm. And they did not give a shit.
Yep.
He's like, their mindset was, why are you here?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, though, I mean, it was like a communist takeover of the country. So
Totally. But like, oh, no.
The people there were like, why are they here? Why are either one of you here? Get the fuck out of here.
No doubt. Hey, man, no doubt. Like, I always say, North Korea is my favorite country because it makes me laugh how defiant they are. But like a bigger part of me is like, man, they're just like, fuck off.
Mm.
They're like, this is what we are.
Yeah.
Go the fuck away.
Yeah, okay. Let
Like,
them be.
we're we're at a ceasefire. We don't have, like, there's no peace treaty with North Korea. You know that, right?
Right.
Like, the Korean War never ended.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like a peace treaty. And that area of the world, man, like, they do not, like, it took,
like you said, honor's a big thing, and
it took a second atomic bomb
mm-hmm.
to get them to surrender. And even then, they were like, well, yeah, not the emperor.
Yeah.
You know, which is crazy. And this may be a hot take, but like, we're the only ones that have ever dropped a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And, you know, what that means, a lot of people don't understand this, is like, literally when that thing exploded, 60,000 people were gone.
Yeah.
Just gone. Not like we had their bodies.
Yep.
Like, evaporated.
Yep.
You know, to like nothing. So, you know, and they justified it by saying that if we went into the Pacific, it was 1 million plus men that were going to die. And we were so devastated by World War II at the time. Like, a lot of people think we were just kicking ass the whole time. We were not.
No, it wasn't the whole. No.
We were
Actually, at that point, when they took the island that Onoda was on, at that point in the war, when Onoda got his orders to go to that island, Japan was rolling.
Yes,
they were rolling, and we were the brunt of their fury.
Well, like I said, nobody ever talks about the Bataan Death March, and the reason is because it's not favorable to our history. You know, we want it to be like, you know, we walk in and kick everybody's ass, but that's not true.
You hear all these little moments that swayed the wars, and they're all these teeny moments that could have changed everything.
Right.
And Onoda could have been part of that if he had got in there and done what he was supposed to do. And
absolutely.
Who knows if the Pacific would have ever been taken back, you know?
Absolutely.
So.
And, you know, like.
Or if they wouldn't have got a stranglehold on us, it would have made us think twice about dropping that bomb. Like, if we do it, then we're going to lose. They're going to do this.
Or that, like, you know,
I do know they say that
closer.
After Pearl Harbor, that the reason why they didn't come to. Did you ever hear about that? The general from Pearl Harbor, why they didn't push to the California coast and start coming mainland? And he said, because the American people are all armed and know how to use them.
Well, that's true. That is that is true. And my dad said that. He said, you know, one thing that you have to understand is that you can't, like,
the other countries know it. They know it.
You can't come here and try to take us over.
Yeah, you're not going to win that.
He's like, for one thing, there's too many organized people that, like, have guns and know how to use them, you know?
Yeah, I mean, think about how many military veterans we had alone.
And my dad wasn't like a gun owner, and he really, he grew up in like the inner city. He grew up in like the inner city of Cincinnati, and you know, he was around like at that time. You know, it's like it was like the '60s, right? And then he goes to Vietnam and he comes back and there's all these riots and shit. And he's like, I never thought I needed a gun until I saw a tank rolling down the street. And he's like, I have to get a gun. We need a gun. And he's like, and my mom, who was like very anti-gun, her brother died in Vietnam. Like, we weren't allowed to have like cowboy guns. Like, we weren't allowed to have.
That's yeah, my wife's like that. She gets like that. Well, I grew up around guns. We always had guns. In fact, like I think I said it on one of the other ones. When we were little, we weren't allowed to have a BB gun. But
right.
We were allowed to have shotguns though.
But like, you know, I feel like people that have, like my roommate, we talked about my roommate in California. He had a shit ton of guns, right?
Yeah.
And but he was sort of like you. He just grew up with them. His dad was in Vietnam, and he's like, yeah, it's just like we had guns in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And then, but he's like, you know, he had a super respect. It's like anybody that I've ever met that grew up with guns, the second you pull a gun up, they fucking take their hand, they push it down.
Yeah.
They're like, don't ever point a gun at somebody. Don't ever make sure the safety's on. Like they give you this talking to, you know. But Americans, agreed. Equally, how much, you know, these other countries, you know, fight for their independence and their freedom, and you know, we fight for their beliefs. I shouldn't even.
So
say
now,
freedom,
is it something where that's it? I mean, is it because honestly, this is a little different than our normal premise where we have a bunch of these theories out there that are floating around on the internet or something about what people think happened. We know what happened. Why it happened is the only thing, and nobody really is theorizing about it. So is it one of those things like you're alluding to right now where it's he was so dedicated that he was continuing that war, he was following his orders to the letter, he was indoctrinated by his own military, and he was doing that? Or was it possible that like it was something else, like where
I'm gonna ask you a question.
It started out that way, but then
I'm gonna ask you a
question. He kind of got a taste for the outlaw life.
I'm gonna ask you a question. We go to war with the Ukraine, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a country that we really have no tie to, except for our president does some business, right?
And the billions of dollars we're giving him.
Okay, right. Okay, let's just say that. Because at the time, we didn't really have any business with Japan.
Mm-mm.
And, you know, we weren't like their enemy. We were kind of like, we weren't really their ally.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly like a country like Ukraine. Like Ukraine's not in NATO. They're not in the UN. They're not in, like, they're trying to join now because they see the benefit of it. But up until now, they're like not part of any group, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Say they turn on us and we go to war with NATO or Ukraine. Ukraine comes over, they get rid of Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C.'s gone. We don't have a government anymore, like a functioning government. We have state government, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Are you going to let them take the road that you live on?
Mm-mm.
Where are you going?
I'm hunkering down.
Right. You're going to go to the hills that you know that you've ridden four-wheelers on.
Yeah.
And if there's no communication, you're not coming down until that shit's settled. And that, to me, is what it is. Like, I think, you know, you get that in your head. I can't surrender. I'm part of the Japanese Imperial Army. And yeah, I'm here to fight. That's why I'm here. And like I said, he's the most stubborn man on earth. But, like, it's hard to say if I'm in his shoes, you know, where I take to the hills and I go fight people that you don't think that they're part of the resistance. Yeah,
but like, doesn't it maybe get into your head at some point? Like, there has been a lot of evidence pushing me to say that this fucking, you know, they're dropping flyers, pamphlets, pictures, and
I know, but
side letters from
people
the
say
general
fake, like right now, people are saying fake news.
Yeah, and then there's people though.
You have
literally
both sides
with you with megaphones yelling for you to quit, to surrender. It's over. The war is over. And
we'll get into what I think, but on his side, yeah, man. I mean, I think if like what you believed in, I think it's a lot easier to say that you would live for something than to say you would die for something. Because to say you would die for something, it gets real thin. It's like your wife, your kids, and outside of that, you're like, okay, why would I die? You know, even your country, you're like, I mean, what, do we have to go to war? Like, you know, like our generation, and I'm not saying we're not patriotic. I'm just saying we question everything, right? So other than your wife and kids, you know, what is there really to die for in your family? Okay, so country at that time was the big thing, you know, and you know, like those guys went all the way. And you know, you're talking about the guy that, you know, wanted to fight and beat the shit out of that guy,
right?
With your dad. Like he's like, fuck it, I'll take it. And that is that hardcore mentality. We have, like, where we grew up, there is like there's several neighborhoods, and one of them, it starts with an E, and I always say, don't fuck with those guys. You know why? They've been eating paint chips and they have nothing to lose, but those guys will fuck you up. Like, I would much rather fight somebody like that, or I'd much rather not fight somebody like him than somebody from like Watts or like, you know, the ghetto of like New York. Fuck that, dude. The people from like where we're from that like grew up rough and they're like Appalachian, fuck that. You don't want any part of those guys. Yeah. Like, you can fight them. You might win, but you know what's going to happen? You're going to have a bloody face. They're going to kick you in the balls. Like all kinds of stuff's going to happen.
Somebody that can hit you in the back of the head with a board.
Right. Like, you're in for it, right? So that's just, those are a few things we have to set before. And I don't know, do you have any more that we have to set before we talk about like what we think?
I couldn't. There's not really too many other ways you can go with it. It was either he was really fighting for his country. He was doing what he thought was the right thing. He was following his orders, even though it's bananas to think that your orders wouldn't be changed over that long a time. That's possible. And my theory kind of is that at some point, I think he kind of did realize that the war was probably over, but he was in command of those few guys, as little as that, you know what I mean? He was in command of those guys. He was in command of his life. He was, you know, he was being successful at all the stuff he was doing too. I mean, they were running all these guerrilla attacks. We talked about the incidents that happened, but you can hear the timelines in between them. I mean, that's a pretty clean resume there. Those guys died, but that was over 30 years. You know what I mean? Right. that was. I
mean, the one guy died 2 years before, like
2 years before, and the other guy was in what, the 50s?
Right.
So, I mean, I start to wonder. You know, I think there's room for the theory that maybe he kind of was aware, and that he kind of was like, this is my world now and I like it. And then he just kind of tricked his brain back into I'm doing this for country. And I think it was when he got found and like when they went through all this hoopla, he maybe not even expected, you know, he probably told that guy, yeah, if I get my orders, and he leaves and gets his orders and his commanding officer and brings him back. I think he was like, well, now it's my opportunity to shine.
So I think at this point,
there's two theories there. I don't know. I think they're both sound. We can go see what we think, I guess.
Yeah, we can see what we think, because I think if you're wondering, like, this everything that's weird, we always have like a mystery, like what we think. I think the mystery, we already know the facts, right? We know he was up on the hill, he fought, he came down, 30 years later. But, like, I think the question is, was he doing it intentionally, or was he doing it out of ignorance?
Right.
Okay, let's see what we think. All right, I'll go first.
Okay.
I think he did it intentionally. I think what this was somebody that dishonor was a big deal to him. And he went to a school that, and I don't know a lot about the school, but it seems like it's sort of an officer's training school. And in the officer's training school, it was taught to him that, like, surrender wasn't an option. And that makes a lot of sense with, like, World War II Japan. The kamikazes, them committing suicide, just the overall fighting. And the people that I met from the Bataan Death March, one story that I heard was that, they get rescued by, so they're, and I said this earlier, that the Japanese were not prepared to take on all these POWs. So they had, like, privates. And, you have like 17-year-old kids, like, in charge of, like, whole units of soldiers. And, right? Like, the war crimes could be, like, rampant, right? Of, like, what these guys would do to, like, the enemy. And so they come and they get liberated. And, this guy who had been, like, starved to death and whatever, he was kind of, like, brought back to health. They're like, okay, you're in charge of all these guys. They're, like, beat them and stabbed them and killed their buddies and whatever. And the Japanese guy's like, kill me. He's like, I just want to die. And he's like, no, man, like, that's not what we're doing. And he's like, as much as I wanted to, he's like, because I saw that guy kill my friend. I saw him, hit my buddy with the butt of his gun. I saw him, do all this atrocious stuff. And as much as I wanted to, that's why we weren't there for that, It wasn't, like, my place to do that. So, yeah, I mean, I think he probably thought this was a way to kind of keep up the fight, because honestly, that kind of fighting works. Guerrilla warfare is the whole reason we won the Revolutionary War. They even said you're not fighting fair.
Yeah, it's the same reason we lost Vietnam.
Exact same reason we lost Vietnam. Right. And, it's the same reason we pulled out of Afghanistan. Like, as much as I hate the way that happened, other part of me understands, like, the Russians were there for how long and never gained any ground.
10 years or something.
Yeah, they never gained any ground.
Not with all that weaponry we were giving them.
No, you're not gonna take those guys over. Those guys live in the mountains. They need minimal supplies, and all they do is act like they're part of society and fucking destroy everything you try to set up. Right?
Right.
How do you fight that? Like, realistically, how do you without like a full offensive going in there and that looks terrible. You know what I mean? That looks like you're a bully.
Yeah.
So, like, you know, politically, what's right with war? There's no way that ever happened. So, like, I kind of think the whole time he knew it was up. And this was like, you know what I can do? I can ruffle enough feathers. I can get enough support. And I can get, eventually, I can get people here to support me.
Yeah.
That's what I think. And then when it came time and they're like, you know, come down, I think he finally realized, probably after 30 years, 29 years, okay, I'm old now. You know? Yeah, I'm old now, and what do I do? You know, and I think that spirit is probably why he was like a national hero. But I think he knew. I think he knew from the beginning. So that's me.
All right. So I feel like he also, I think he knew there was no war. It just, to me, be out there 30 years and think that, and I get it, it's Japan, they've had some really long wars, but it's still like you're in the modern era. It's different. It's not like it used to be where wars would last forever and ever and ever and ever. You know, I just don't see him going, you know what, like you would see the villages. It's not like you were constantly out of range to make out who was shooting at you and stuff. You knew what the fuck you were doing. You were robbing people. You were killing them if they caught you. You killed 30 people. I think at some point he was just like, I'm getting the better of these pieces of shit. I'm not going to go down. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care if they gave up. I don't care if the war is over. I'm here. I'm stuck here, and I'm going to fucking make life hell for the people that took over this island from me, because I think he held a lot of resentment and anger about the fact that he wasn't allowed to carry out his orders in the first place that would have stopped that whole business from happening. He wouldn't be in that bad spot. I think this all comes from this point of resentment for that being allowed to happen, and he couldn't do anything about it, even though he knew exactly what to do.
And that's a big problem for somebody that's headstrong.
Yeah, that's
going into
based on honor. Yeah,
right. Yeah, like, hey man, they sent me here to disrupt everything, and what? You're not gonna let me do it?
Right. And now, then all of a sudden they're all dead except for me and 3 guys. Well, we're gonna make life hell for everybody on here. We'll show them what we could have done. And I don't think so. I think he knew the war was over, and I think he was just doing what he was doing. And I think that once he got to the point where they were like, here, surrender, and he finally surrendered and did all the ceremonial stuff, they took him back to Japan, and he lauded him as a hero. I think more than Japan, I don't think that engine weighed as much as what he did weighed on him. And I don't think he could stay in Japan getting lauded as and held up as this hero.
Right.
And knowing what he was really doing over there. And so I think that's why he went to Brazil. And I think he went to Brazil and he grew his conscience back. And when he got money, because he started doing stuff, he let like the Brazilian Air Force, he owned like a little island.
Yeah, he let them train on it, right?
Yeah, he let the Brazilian Air Force train on it. They even gave him like an award for all this stuff. So it started happening over there, but I think he was thinking over there, like, I earned this, and this is my way back. And then when he heard the story about the kid killing his parents back in Japan, he was like, okay, it's go time. I can go back and do it right. You know, I can do this good for my country. And he starts this program. Like you said, he ran this program for years and years and years, well into his 90s. Was he working directly with that group that he started, where he would work with teenagers and stuff to keep them from doing bad shit. You know what I mean? And it's like, and his wife started that scholarship donation on his behalf. It was like 10 grand.
It sounds like making amends.
It was. That's what I think. That's what it was, because I think he knew in his heart that he done some horrible shit, and he had to go away from it and then come back with the right you know what I mean? The right utensils.
At some point, it's not your generals telling you what to do.
Okay, because full disclosure, this story definitely is the weirdest, but he was not the last dude to surrender.
No, right.
There was another guy that surrendered in Indonesia. Year. He was in Indonesia on an island. Same kind of situation.
Yeah,
right? Him and a few guys, they get chased off into the hills. But the difference was he was like a Taiwanese immigrant to Japan, and he joined the Japanese Royal Army or whatever. And he when he got over there, when they got overrun, they went back into the woods. They did the same thing with them. They got the flyers and stuff to surrender, and a lot of them came out and gave up. A few of them stayed. They did their little guerrilla war attacks for a little bit there, but they said he would go off by himself for long periods of time and come back. And then when he came back at one point, he disavowed himself from the group. He basically deserted.
Right.
And then he went off by himself, and he lived in secrecy up in the hills, and he like only made cook fires at night and shit, like most of his life, you know what I mean? But and they were talking about like he didn't surrender, but it was more like with him, it felt more like he knew the war was over. He didn't want nothing to do with the army. Now, if he gets caught, he's got to surrender to them, or he could die or whatever. And now his own army probably wants to kill him too for deserting or whatever. So he's kind of like, I'm just going to hide out in the woods and live my life. Because he was like planting and shit. He was growing crops and stuff.
Right.
So he's a bit of a different story. It wasn't such a weird story with him. It was more like, fuck this war. I'm going to go off and live by myself in the woods.
And I could see that, like, to get you to a point where you kill other people, you have to really believe.
Yeah. And they said he did finally convince. They kind of did the same thing with him, but I don't think he needed any convincing. When he gave himself up, it was just like, I'm tired of living in the woods. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It wasn't as weird as Hiroo's story. Hiroo's story is really weird, especially when he got found he still had 500 rounds. He had 500 rounds of ammunition.
Yeah.
The other guy had like carrots. You know what I mean?
Right.
It was nowhere near the same kind of story.
So I think we're both on the same page. I think he knew, and he's like, I'm going to keep fighting. And then when it came time, he's like, okay, fine.
Yeah, I think his ego took a blow when that island got taken back over, and he knew he could done something about it. I think
30 years will do that to you.
Yeah, I think it's stuck in his crawl, man. And he was taking it out on the people, because there's no way you don't know what you're doing. You know you get what I'm saying? The first couple incursions might feel like that. Like if you feel people coming through the woods and you're hiding and you see guns, you start shooting and they start shooting back, and you're like, yeah, sure. I was good on shooting on them, you know. But then it starts getting to where it's like, yeah, I know that's a farmer because I'm going to steal his fucking cow. So,
you have like at some point, you know, you're firing on non-military.
Yeah. I mean, the first few, like I said, the first few years or whatever, maybe you know, I get that. Like honestly, even the first few years, several years, it could have been like that, because there is a possibility the war was dug in like that. You might be the last vestige of hope on this island.
Sure.
So I get that for a little while, and then I get the first guy that quit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He makes sense. It's like, yeah. Yeah, let's
He's
just get
around the fire. He's like, you guys, it's over. And they're like, shut up. Shut up, private.
Yeah, and they always, the Japanese language always sounds angry. So,
Yeah.
so, but
All
anyway,
right, well,
that's what I think.
So I think I agree with you. I think he knew what was going on, and he just thought he could continue the fight and make a disruption.
Yeah, and I don't think he ever thought he would be like found and brought back and lauded
He'd
as a hero.
probably die.
Yeah, he would die out there in them hills, and he would die like a hero. They would be like, "Well, he stayed out there the whole time," and and I think that's what it was. Is like point where you're like, because you do have that line in your head where he's saying, "Don't give up and don't kill yourself." That's your fallback. Like you can always come back and say, "Well, that's because my blah blah blah, and I follow orders to the letter." You know what I mean?
Right.
You can always say that, and nobody will argue it. When the real reason might have been like, you know what? I did some pretty bad shit. Figured I was going to die in them hills. I didn't think some fucking guy was going to find me.
Some hippie.
Certainly didn't think he was going to go back and find my commanding officer. I said that as like a wild goose chase.
At least you're number one behind the panda and the abominable snowman.
Right. Because think about it. What if that was it? What if he said it to him where he's like, yeah, if you can get a letter from my commanding officer, and rolled his eyes, he came back with him. Holy shit. I figured he'd be dead. He was like 10 years older than me.
He sells books? Oh shit! All right, well, so I think we're both in agreement.
Yeah,
he did it. He did it to keep the war alive.
Yeah, in his heart.
In his heart. All right. Well, I'm Anthony.
I'm Brandon,
and this is Everything That's Weird.
For show notes and merchandise, go to www.everythingthat'sweird.com. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And be sure to like, subscribe, and review anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening. See you next time.